Breakthrough. Breakthrough.
Breakthrough.
Breakthrough. Breakthrough. Breakthrough. Breakthrough.
You're watching Breakthrough News.
You are indeed watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side Live. I'm one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here, as always, alongside my co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, happy to be back with you.
It's good to be back with you, Eugene.
No, it's always good to be with you. I believe you're on the continent of Europe currently, so
I am.
your globe-trotting continues. I appreciate that.
As usual. And wow, what a crazy time it's been since I've been going around Europe. I'll say I've been to a couple different countries so far, and every time I turn on the news, it's Afghanistan in every language.
Yes,
Just
I mean,
constantly. The
it is.
airport, which obviously big news coming out
yeah.
now.
Well, wow, we're just going to keep talking at the same time, I guess, but that's all right. The
Sorry.
airport, why am I laughing? That's terrible. The airport in Kabul, there was what appears to be a suicide bombing. We will be getting to that. We'll be updating you on that in a bit. We've got plenty for you here on the show. We're going to be talking really expansively about Afghanistan, not just what happened today, but of course, this is a very notable happening here with the bombing at the airport, but we're also going to be checking in on the Nabisco strike that's happening all around the United States. No contracts, no snacks. We're also going to be discussing the issue with unemployment insurance being cut off, really based on a range of fraudulent claims regarding unemployment insurance. So that's going to be on there as well. We're going to be checking in West Virginia with the protest against Joe Manchin for all of his ridiculousness. Also talking a little bit about Peru, where there is a little bit of a squeeze play being placed on the leftist president Castillo there very recently after his election. So many, many different things for you here to discuss on the show, which is a great time to say, if you're watching this, go ahead and hit that share button so whoever is following you can follow us. And if you happen to be watching on YouTube, this would also be a great time to take a second and hit subscribe so you can get all of the great stuff that we have coming to you here from Breakthrough News. Make sure you also hit the bell so you get alerts about all of the fantastic things that you have just subscribed to here from Breakthrough News. So great show, a lot happening. Obviously, Afghanistan going to be a topic here at the top and at the end. So there's a lot to be said on that issue, of course. Subscribe, hit the bell. You can also go to patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a patron. So here we go. Well, Rania, you mentioned it at the top. There has been this issue. I just want to make sure I get this correct here. Apologies for looking down, but you want to get the details correct here. There's been a bombing at the Kabul airport. This is one of those situations where casualties, I'm sure, will continue to go up as we continue to talk here. There's a very large number of people who are injured. We're seeing reports of maybe as many as 40 people who have been killed. The Associated Press is saying 11 Marines and a Navy medic have been killed. So that obviously, at least 60 injured people I'm seeing. But obviously those U.S. troops being killed will roil the political scene here in the United States, where there's still quite a bit of controversy. The UK saying that they are going to stay. They're going to continue their evacuation. So it certainly is a question of what exactly is going to happen. But right now, it doesn't seem like there's any major pullback in terms of the airlifts that are happening out of Kabul airport, and that allegedly, at least, will continue until August 31st. At least one U.S. Senator, Lindsey Graham, has called for the reopening of Bagram Air Force Base. So I think, Rania, that maybe will be the first sort of ripple effect from this, as the neocon calls to sort of reoccupy and go to war again in Afghanistan. I'm sure will be boosted a little bit by this. Obviously, the issue of ISIS even being there in Afghanistan is a whole other issue. Biden did say in the G7 meeting that they were expecting an ISIS attack in the near future, and here we are. I mean, I guess there's so many things to say, about the whole situation, but Afghanistan, as you said, just totally taking over the news with in the whole world, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So what's happened now, though, of course, is that you have, I believe, this new bombing at the airport. They're saying it was done by the Islamic State in Afghanistan, which is basically called ISK, the Islamic State in Khorasan. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But basically that's the ISIS name for the group in Afghanistan. And and there was actually a warning about this yesterday, which was interesting. It's like suddenly the Americans and even the Taliban were warning that there might be an attack at the airport by this group, and then there was an attack by this group. What's interesting about this is that it wasn't the Taliban, right?
Right.
And that it kind of puts the Taliban in the situation of being kind of a counterterrorism force in Afghanistan. Of course, America went into Afghanistan to rout the Taliban, which they temporarily did or thought they did. And now that they're back in charge, they're kind of tasked with dealing.
Well, Rania, we might have lost you briefly there. You may have
Kind of
frozen.
interesting. I think another interesting aspect, of course, everybody's focused on the airport, um, is that as has been happening since the Taliban took over Kabul, the people were really scared, understandably so, because of the history of the Taliban being so horrible. We'll talk more about this later with Ann Wright when we have her on. But what's been really interesting is how they've kind of shown a level of restraint that I don't think people were prepared for or were thought that was going to happen. I mean, it's still early to tell, but so far, they haven't been targeting former government employees. They're still allowing people to leave. They're saying that they will continue to allow people to leave even after the American deadline. And from I've been speaking to a couple different people on the ground, and they were really scared when the Taliban first came in. They're still scared because there's a lot of unknowns here, but so far, they basically implemented some kind of law and order, and it's been a very smooth transition. Despite, all eyes being on the airport, which has been much more chaotic. And really the chaos at the airport can be blamed largely on, the kind of haphazard way that the West left without any sort of plan. And, but this is what was going to happen.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, it reminds me to some degree what you were saying there about the Taliban and ISIS, of the reports that are emerging. It might have been the New York Times, might have been the Washington Post. I forget who broke the story about how the U.S. was bombing ISIS fighters when they were fighting with the Taliban, and that they were in some ways acting like the Air Force of the Taliban against ISIS. And it really, I mean, if anything else, it just speaks to how completely destructive these U.S. occupations are, whether we're talking about Iraq, whether we're talking about Libya, whether we're talking about, well, the sort of Syria-Iraq combine, certainly Afghanistan. It's like entirely new entities that either didn't exist before in the case of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, or entirely new entities in terms of them showing up in places and other organizations, terrorist organizations just arising out of the ashes of these U.S. interventions and occupations and making the situation even more worse, even more volatile, even more deadly. And it's just, after all of this, it's just amazing. And we talked about it last week as well, how the media still refuses to really learn the lesson and refer to the lessons of all these failed occupations. And yeah, I think it's very interesting to see how the Taliban is operating. I mean, and there's a lot happening. I've read that Hamid Karzai, and this is in many ways really tells you something, is now trying to resurrect the plan put together by President Najibullah, who, of course, was the last president of the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, the socialist state of Afghanistan. His plan for a broad form of unity that was multi-ethnic, multi-confessional in terms of religion, but would still allow the country to stay together. And it's quite a coming of full circle to see his plan being essentially resurrected, this is what they say, by Hamid Karzai in the negotiations he is engaging with the Taliban. But I think that it's been mentioned before here on the show and in different places, they don't want to be 100% internationally isolated, but there's really no way to avoid being 100% internationally isolated without at least pretending that you're generally going in the direction. And the one thing I'll say, Rania, that I think is also interesting on that note is I saw a Taliban spokesperson say, look, all we're saying is we're going to do it like Saudi Arabia, and you all like Saudi Arabia, so like, what's the big deal? But I thought that was sort of a telling statement about where the Taliban is sort of looking to position themselves, which is like, no, we're not the 1998 Taliban. We're like the Saudi Arabian style Taliban. I don't know how that's better, but we're like a more palatable version of what you thought.
Right. And they're prepared to sort of govern, right? Which was, I think, unexpected. But that's what they want to do. That's what they're going to try to do on some level. And I think it's also interesting that it keeps being referred to in American media as the fall of Afghanistan, right? the fall of Afghanistan is an interesting way to portray. I mean, you can call it a lot of things. You know, no one likes the Taliban. At least we're you know, we don't like the Taliban, but they're Afghan. Like, why would you call it your occupation like is gone now or is leaving, and it's going into in the country is going to be in the hands of a group of Afghans. I don't know how you can call that the fall of Afghanistan. The fall of Afghanistan, that should have been used to describe 2001 when the Americans invaded and occupied and took out the government that existed in Afghanistan, right? And then there's also this other interesting thing going on where, you know, well, there's a couple things. First of all, the portrayal of soldiers. I mean, I think that just the way that American and some British reporters are posting these propaganda photos of, you know, Marines, soldiers holding Afghan babies in the airport, like as if they didn't spend the last 20 years killing Afghans and occupying and destroying their country. Like they really want to try to feel good about themselves as Westerners. So they have to put up this, you know, very obvious facade of like help. And then you see, of course, like all these other people want to be white saviors and save an Afghan. Like that's another thing that's cropped up on Twitter is all these like millionaires and billionaires and experts. And I say experts with big quotes around it, who never cared about the country, but suddenly they want to swoop in like these white saviors and rescue Afghans on their private planes so they can like tweet about it. It's just interesting to see the way that people in the West are reacting in imperial fashion, as this, you know, as the US occupation leaves Afghanistan. And they can't get over it. They can't get over the fact that the US is leaving. And, you know, I've been speaking to a couple people around Europe as well. And I mean, the Europeans are freaking out about it as well. They're really freaking out about it. NATO did not want to leave. The European countries did not want to leave. I mean, they have more of a personal or more of a like a geographic reason to not want to leave. Like they have this fear of, you know, the refugees that are going to be fleeing Afghanistan for European countries. Because like with all US wars across the Middle East and places like Afghanistan, it's actually Europe that ends up dealing with the consequences of people fleeing their homelands because of these US wars. So it really makes you wonder why Europe continues to be friends with America, when in many ways America has become such a huge threat to European national
and it tells you
security.
everything that the main takeaway from the European governments is that they should become more imperialist. I mean, they're all talking about how like, wow, we don't have enough military capacity, which in and of itself tells you something that all of the European countries together and Canada on top of that, without the United States, cannot stay 1 hour at the Kabul airport any longer than the US. But then I saw some guy, some German government official in the New York Times, he's like lamenting the fact, and he's like, we have to discuss and talk about how we can develop more airlifting capacity. So it's basically like their only takeaway isn't let's do fewer occupations. It's like, wow, we got to start being able to do our own occupations. We can't just let the US be occupying everybody.
We can't depend on the Americans.
It's wild. It's really wild. I don't know if you saw Seth
It's so
Moulton, the US
pathetic.
congressman who flew there yesterday.
Oh God, he's the worst Democratic congressman, former like army guy, right?
He was in the Iraq War and then some Republican who was also an Iraq War veteran. And they actually they have an interview in I think it was the Post today, maybe it was the Times, where they actually have now been, I guess, Biden pilled, if you will, and they were saying no, everything Biden is saying is right now. We were not sorry we went, but we now realize they weren't lying to us, because I guess I don't really know exactly what they were talking about because I don't pay attention to Seth Moulton, but it was interesting that they were like, yeah, we felt like we just had to fly there and figure out what was going on for ourselves. And then now they're in the Post like, nope, you know what? 100% with Biden, 100% with him, makes perfect sense, doing a great job.
Seth Moulton, also the one who during I'm sorry, this is like not related to Afghanistan entirely. It kind of is tangentially, but whenever there's like a school shooting, whenever there's a school shooting or any mass shooting in the US, he's the one who will always tweet, you know, I didn't carry a weapon around Iraq so that people could carry the same ones around America, or like something stupid.
Now he
like
could just gun down a bunch of school children in Iraq and like cool, but
that's different.
You know, that's very different. But it does speak to the overall situation. Asmari Desta, shout out to you for donating there in the super chat. You've in a very interesting GIF, it seems. I've just seen it described to me. So shout out for the donation and thank you for the give, which is
Wait,
expressing
can we
enthusiasm.
read the description of the GIF? It's so cute.
This description, which comes from our creative director, not me, by the way, is fan character bouncing their heart-shaped ponytail with stars in their eyes.
That's how it's described automatically when you copy and paste the GIF. I think that's hilarious. One more thing about Seth Moulton. More thing about Seth Moulton that I just remembered. He also claimed to have fought Iran in Iraq. Completely untrue. Like, he actually made that clear. I think it was when Qasem Soleimani was murdered.
Yeah.
Like, he made this claim where he was like, I know Iran and their horrible ways. I fought them in Iraq, but... And it was like, no, you definitely didn't. I promise you did fight Iran.
That's unbelievable.
In Iraq. So.
Martin or Martine Hernandez saying, thanks for the analysis. No, thank you for checking us out. Really appreciate it. I believe you donated in the super chat before, so I appreciate you being a dedicated follower/listener. I mean, I know we're on video, but you know, some people are doing things. You're moving around your room or your apartment, whatever. Shout out to you. Shout out to everybody who's watching right now. Don't forget to go ahead and hit that share button. We're talking about Afghanistan now. We're going to be talking about Afghanistan later. We'll have Colonel Ann Wright with us. We're going to be talking about the Nabisco strike, unemployment insurance being cut ridiculously, Joe Manchin. There's protest against him for his ridiculousness, so we'll definitely be checking in there. We're going to be talking about pressure being placed on Peru's president from the right wing. So a lot left here on the show, so don't forget to hit that share button, and if you're watching on YouTube, to make sure you subscribe and get the alerts. But yeah, no, the Seth Moulton, obviously completely ridiculous. And I think in a way just totally indicative of how ridiculous the entire U.S. Congress is as it concerns, you know, quote unquote war and peace issues. I mean, they're more concerned whether or not the president asked them for permission in Yemen as opposed to two presidents having waged a essentially genocidal war on Yemen in terms of what the impact has been. I mean, it's y'all process procedure, not whether or not these are massive moral catastrophes where millions of people have been killed. I mean, the bipartisan consensus around war, I mean, this has really been, to me, case in point, how somehow the neocons, the people who have destroyed half the world and led the United States down a path that in and of itself has had many negative domestic repercussions, have somehow become the lead voices on Afghanistan. I mean, I don't think I've seen one person who was an anti-war activist who said we shouldn't have gone in 2001, get an op-ed, I mean, I don't know, I'm not watching CNN or whatever, but I'm assuming they're not really having them on. There was even some scuttlebutt, I don't know if this is true, but there was some mainstream journalists sharing this, that there are some anonymous officials in the Biden administration saying that they're actually having trouble getting people placed in the media to defend their decision, like that they're, you know, getting stonewalled by bookers. So it's amazing to see how the least credible voices on foreign policy are all, and it's this not just Afghanistan, are always resurrected in these moments where it seems like U.S. policy is in flux.
And, you know, Eugene, it's also this complete hypocrisy where the same voices who told us and still tell us that we have to oppose Assad to the point of the people in Idlib, Idlib is now in northern Syria. It now belongs to the biggest group of, it's now the biggest Al-Qaeda safe haven in history, right? Brett McGurk himself said that. That's not me saying it. And despite that, which actually does present a threat, and I'm not in any way suggesting that the U.S. needs to go bomb or occupy northern Syria, but they supported those people as moderate rebels in Syria to fight Assad. Meanwhile, we're supposed to believe that the Taliban, which, by the way, doesn't actually have international jihadist ambitions, unlike Al-Qaeda, which does.
Yeah.
The Taliban is a very localized group. It's an Afghan group.
They tried to surrender to the U.S. in 2001.
Ideology. Right, exactly.
About it.
But the point is it's complete hypocrisy. These people don't even mean it. They do not mean it. People need to understand they don't mean it when they say they care about women's rights. Because if they cared about women's rights, these same people wouldn't be calling for the Syrian Taliban to take over Syria like they have been for the last decade. And they will also, these same people, some of them, if they were alive at the time, were the same people who were supporting the Mujahideen back in the 80s.
No, of course.
They
support
don't
the Saudi
care
monarchy.
about women's rights.
Right. I mean, they support these
Exactly.
governments
The
like
only
Poland, you know, these
consistency.
far-right governments that, under the guise of family values, want to limit the role of women in society. I mean, it's clear as day. I mean,
Exactly.
look at them. I mean, when we look at the
The
Republicans,
only
especially,
consistency
yeah,
The only consistency with these people is that they support whatever helps imperialism.
yeah.
That is their only consistent belief system. And that is why they can have one, be women's rights on one thing and then literally support Al Qaeda in the other sense,
With no sense of hypocrisy either, I mean, it's almost and the way it's reported is with no sense of hypocrisy, and that really becomes, I think, in a big way for me, the takeaway of a lot of this is that the so-called media, so-called free and fair, so-called fair and balanced, whatever, is often working from the same assumptions, and so they don't even think to ask a question like, okay, well, you're saying something about women's rights in Afghanistan, Representative so-and-so, but, you were at the party at the Saudi embassy last week. So what's the situation here? What's the rub? You don't even get that. All you get is what we got, as we mentioned last week, with the guy saying, why aren't we in Tajikistan? On the border, excuse me, on the border with Tajikistan, on the border with Iran, on the border with Pakistan, on the border with China. Well, to be on the border of any of those countries would mean you were still in Afghanistan. I mean, but everything about it. Tajikistan, which, by the way, just in case anyone's wondering, does not want U.S. troops, and in fact, it's told the United States, we will not allow you to do any troop activities out of here. Kyrgyzstan years ago said, you got to get out of here. So beyond even that guy asking it, people don't even want it. But it just gives you a sense of the mentality, I think, of the sort of imperial bureaucracy, that whether we're talking about the State Department, whether we're talking about the White House, whether we're talking about the people who are allegedly asking them the tough questions, they're more worried that the U.S. isn't in a country that doesn't want them there than the overall sort of moral narrative, I guess, of these occupations. And I'll just say it again. I mean, it really is notable. All of them have been abject failures. But anyway, we're going to come back to this. There's a lot more to be said. We're going to have Colonel Ann Wright on later, which is going to be great. But we have a great show on a range of different issues. So we want to switch gears here to a very important issue here in the United States. And that's, really the issue of people's well-being in the context of a very difficult economic situation induced by the pandemic, in particular, the issue of unemployment insurance and the ending of unemployment insurance, or at least some elements of it, in many states. We're very happy to be joined as we continue the show here by Jenna Gary, who is from the National Employment Law Project. Jenna, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, the pleasure is all ours, and I just want to start maybe just sort of factually here, because I feel like a lot of people have heard unemployment insurance is being ended, potentially being ended, don't know exactly what's going on. So if you could just give us a sense of where the unemployment insurance programs that were boosted during the pandemic are at now, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, I would love to. And thanks so much for having me on and bringing attention to this. Like you said, such a huge issue that's going to affect millions of workers coming up here. So right now, there's both regular unemployment insurance that functions whether we're in a crisis or not. And, regular unemployment insurance is going to continue just as it has been. However, during this crisis, because our program is so insufficient and basically blocks and leaves out a huge swath of the population, Congress enacted these temporary emergency measures to make sure people actually had the supports they needed during this pandemic crisis. And so that was our pandemic unemployment assistance, which provided people like gig workers, your part-time workers, people who are usually can't get regular UI could now get benefits. And then you had the program that for people that exhausted their regular state benefits, because many states only provide up to 26 weeks, some as low as 12 or 16 weeks of benefits. And then finally, the final program that provided the additional funding. So the extra $300, originally $600, all of those are going to end on September 6th, on Labor Day. And for individuals that are receiving PUA, there's going to be no additional benefits that they can access.
Wow. Well, that just feels so perverse for it to be ending on Labor Day of all times.
I know.
I mean, a lot of people's holidays are going to be tricky. So, I mean, how many people roughly are going to be affected here? And I guess because I guess the real rationale for it is, well, we don't need it anymore because everything's fine with the economy. I mean, how are you evaluating those claims as well?
Yeah, we hear this over and over again. So let's first start with who's going to be impacted. So unfortunately, we've already seen early termination of these benefits. 26 states decided to end their benefits early. 24 actually have. 2 states, because of legal action taken by workers, got those benefits turned back on. And that impacted roughly 4.7 million people when those 26 states ended early. What we're going to see on Labor Day is it's estimated 7.3 million people are going to be impacted by those cutoffs completely. Based on numbers that were released yesterday, we know that currently 8.8 million workers are receiving these expanded programs. And that's the vast majority of people on unemployment insurance. It's roughly about 74%. And so, we keep hearing about this great recovery of the labor market. And yes, our labor market is recovering, but it's an uneven recovery. It is a recovery for some portions of the population and not for others. The overall unemployment rate is 5.4%. But when you break that down by race, you have Black workers experiencing 8.2% unemployment and Latinx workers experiencing 6.6%. So when we're talking about the fact that we don't need this, we aren't looking at the whole story. And I don't think there's anyone who's looked at these numbers as experts that think this is the time that these should end for individuals being able to thrive and for our economy to continue to recover.
I think
I'm curious. Sorry. Go ahead, Eugene. Okay.
No, go ahead,
We hear
Rania,
you.
please.
I'm just curious, given what you're saying, it seems like a lot of the sort of deadlines for the mitigation efforts that were put in place because of COVID have been coming to an end over and over. And then we've seen, because of some pushback, the deadlines have been extended, like with the eviction moratorium last month, and the extension for pausing student loans payments has been extended repeatedly. I'm curious if there's any momentum politically at this moment to try to extend unemployment benefits. I think they were extended previously at some point. So is there any momentum at all, or at this point is this not on the agenda of anybody? Because I haven't seen any politicians saying much about unemployment benefits at all.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's definitely on the minds of unemployed workers. And there is a huge push by unemployed workers that are organizing and are calling and are pushing for this. But on the Hill in Congress, we haven't seen anyone willing to kind of pick this up. We were hoping that with the rise of the Delta variant and all the, unknowns that arise because of that there would be kind of that political will to push for this extension. But we're just not seeing it. And where we want to move is like, yes, these temporary measures were needed and were essential during this time, but they just highlight the inadequacies of our UI system and the need for long-term structural reform. We can't keep putting temporary things in place with arbitrary deadlines. We need a system that works for everyone at all times, and we need that reform now.
I'm really glad you made that point and I think at the beginning of the pandemic, this is something we saw so clearly. I don't know why this one particularly is staying out of my mind, but like Washington State, the system was just collapsing under the weight of the claims. I mean, I don't necessarily want to say what have we learned, because I know people like the National Employment Law Project have been making this point about unemployment insurance for some time. But I mean, what are some of the biggest defects in the existing program that were just sort of revealed here, and how can we fix them?
Yeah, I mean, the existing program, UI was created in 1935 at a very different time in a very different labor market. And it was explicitly created with a white male worker in mind, and it excluded many people, and particularly workers of color, and excluding farm workers, part-time workers, domestic workers. And so we need transformation of the system, because I think what we saw is, particularly with the pandemic unemployment assistance program, this program had to be put into place because our UI system does not match up to today's labor market, and the eligibility requirements leave out large swaths of that. And the people left out are disproportionately our workers of color that are in this new labor market. And so at the height of the pandemic, you had nearly 16 million people accessing these pandemic programs. That means our UI system as it stands would have left 16 million people out. And this is what NELP has been saying for years, as you pointed out, is like our system does not reflect the needs of our current labor market, particularly those that have been historically excluded.
One thing that I think is also relevant and in this broader conversation about the economy is the impact of unemployment insurance on the economic recovery. I mean, it seems like that to just end these programs, assuming that many people will then have to struggle more, I mean, that seems like it has a feedback loop aspect that could actually affect, as opposed to assist, this issue of a recovery.
Oh, absolutely. I think, it's estimated that $1 of unemployment insurance benefits equals $1.61 back into the economy. And without unemployment insurance, people simply don't have the ability to spend in their local economy. I think without these expanded benefits, we would not have seen the type of recovery we have during this pandemic. And when you cut them off, and this is, we saw actually when these benefits lapsed earlier at the end of December 2020, before they were restarted, we saw exactly that happening. We saw people reporting not being able to afford rent, food insecurity, and we saw a decrease in spending in the economy. These go hand in hand. And you said it, people are going to suffer individually, and we need to care about that. But our economy is going to suffer as well.
And is there Rania, please.
I was just gonna make a point, and more than anything
Please,
else, it's
make
just a
a point.
comment. Like hearing these numbers laid out, because unemployment insurance, and you're right, it's a completely temporary fix. But it doesn't cost that much for the US government. And I'm just thinking, because Afghanistan's been in the news and dominating the news, like the US government spent $6 trillion on this war in Afghanistan, and that's, I think, probably an underestimate. $6 trillion. We have a Pentagon budget that's like $750 billion. And meanwhile, like this meager amount of money to people who need it so that they don't, get kicked out of their homes and go hungry is just like too much. And I'm sorry, I just had to make that comment just because this, in the backdrop of all this is this news about Afghanistan. And, spending $6 trillion in the last 20 years to destroy a country while hollowing out our own like this is just really incredible on the part of our political leaders.
Yeah, I mean, people's values show through in a crisis situation. That's how I always feel about anything, is when there's a crisis, what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, and who you're going to do it for shows so much. And I think just the fact that unemployment insurance, in one of the biggest crises we've ever faced, it's more about when we can start cutting people off than how we can help people. It does say something about where I think a lot of maybe politicians' priorities are, but I think these have been overwhelmingly popular programs, which in and of itself says something sort of about the political system. And I think in a way, Jenna, we see this play out in terms of some of the states. I mean, I know some states have taken some steps to sort of bolster their unemployment insurance a little bit, I think, moving forward. So it feels like there's also kind of a geographical aspect to these cutoffs that, some people will be in even worse situations than others because of where they happen to live.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why we're calling for federal reform of the program, because right now, depending on where you live or how you're paid to do the work that you do, you're going to experience very different benefit levels. I mean, we have some states that have a maximum weekly benefit of around like $230 a week. That is not enough to even afford, your rent during that time. And you have other states that have much higher weekly benefit rates, but that shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter where you live for the benefits you get. And so that's why the federal government must step in and actually mandate real standards for these programs, standards that allow people to care for themselves, their families, and thrive in their communities.
No, I think that's a very good point, and I think that in a way, it's also easier to administer. I mean, I personally have always felt one of the biggest challenges you have is in every state you have different rules, different forms you have to fill out. Some states got a lot of people working there. Some people got like 5 people working in the office, and I mean, having such a state-based system, it opens up such a opening for. Even if you're eligible, it becomes difficult for people to get the benefits because you're jumping through so many hoops.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that was, if anything was highlighted during this time within the UI system, it was the inefficiencies of having 53 state separate systems that not only led to each state trying to fix, come up with its own solutions to fix these systemic issues, but also allowed these criminal enterprises to go in and clog up the system, take money out of it, and leave claimants who were eligible, to get the money that they needed. And so you see some political will to change this. The American Rescue Plan Act allocated $2 billion to the Department of Labor to help increase equity within the program, the delivery of unemployment insurance benefits. And the Department of Labor just released some of their plans of how they're going to actually spend that $2 billion. And two of the main things that I think kind of go to this point you're addressing is one, the federal government is going to start developing some of its own IT technology that states can then implement. So again, we have one solution that all states can use, and we start getting some consistency through the application process, through the notices, through the eligibility. And another is they're actually going to deploy what they call tiger teams to these various states to do a deep dive into the problems and the access issues that were experienced and continue to be experienced by claimants, and then be able to share that across the states and have it all connected back to the federal system. So there is some hope in that area, but there needs to be more. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good point. And I'm glad you brought up the issue of fraud, because there's also a lot of people saying, oh, well, people game the system, so this shows how we should never do anything like this, rather than how we should fix it. I mean, you sort of alluded to it. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on that point, though, because I do feel, that has become an undercurrent now with both this and other CARES Act related programs.
Yeah, I think I just want to make it very clear of we need to define what fraud is. People like to talk about fraud like it's individuals going at the system, and that's the problem. That is not the problem. That is something the UI system has been able to handle. It. Individual claimant fraud has never been a huge issue within the UI system. What happened during this pandemic with the CARES Act programs is that these criminal international enterprises that have been doing identity theft saw an opening, because instead of having a system that was already set up to turn on during times of crisis and increase benefits, we had to create these systems from scratch, and we sent it to states to create these systems from the ground up, and they were ill-equipped to set up the right systems, the right checks to keep out these identity fraud criminal rings. But it is not about individuals cheating the system. And I think it's very important to make that clear.
No, I think that's actually critically important in terms of the propaganda that's out here around this. Well, Jen, I really appreciate you joining us and helping sort through all of this. I think you read a lot of news stories, see a lot of headlines, but it's hard to really put our finger on it. Appreciate all your work and appreciate you giving us some time here on the Freedom Side.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
No, of course, anytime. Well, yeah, Rania, I think you said it. I mean, it's just, it's such a shambolic look at the true, realities that exist in terms of the political priorities.
The priorities
of this country.
No,
go ahead.
No, the priorities. It's a priority situation. I mean, we're in a public health emergency right now, and it's also an economic emergency as a consequence. And it's been this way. And what's so amazing is you see these articles every few months, every quarter or so, showing that these programs that have existed to stop people from falling into extreme poverty have actually reduced poverty as a whole in America. Like, poverty has declined because of these unemployment benefits, because of, giving a higher child tax credit and all these various ways that the government managed to essentially provide a safety net for people at a time when they needed it, at a time when we basically had like an economic depression. And I think that, one of the lessons of that is that you can actually deliberately prevent people from falling into poverty with good public policy. Like, all it takes is actually prioritizing the needs of your population and spending the money where you should be spending it, right? And so it's like the fact that we have the kind of poverty that we do in America, it's a choice of our policymakers. And I don't think Americans realize how unique it is to America as a developed country to have the sort of poverty that we do, to like be in American cities and just have to like walk over homeless people, literally. I mean, there's very few other places in the world except for the countries that we've hollowed out through imperialism where you have that level of extreme poverty. It's fascinating the extent to which the American government is able to get away with denying this sort of basic support for people's needs.
I mean, it really is. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you just look at it, it's like, it's not that, as I always say, it's like, it's not surprising. You want to be surprised, but, it really is still outrageous. It's actually something I have to say that the great Bill Ayers once told me. He said, you can never lose your sense of outrage. If it is outrageous, you should say it's outrageous, no matter how unsurprised you may be. But talking about other outrageous things that are out here, workers at Nabisco all across the United States have been forced to go on strike because the company is trying to impose some ridiculous conditions on them, some ridiculous givebacks in terms of their health care and other pieces at a recent current contract dispute. So in Richmond, Virginia, in Portland, Oregon, and Aurora, Colorado, and I think actually in a few other places, workers are on strike at Nabisco, and we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Stephen James, who's a 20-year baker on strike. He's with BCTGM Local 358 out of Richmond, Virginia. Shout out to Virginia. And we're also very honored to be joined here by Jesus Martinez, who's the Local 364 president in Portland, Oregon, also of the BCTGM. Stephen, Jesus, thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us here.
No, well, the pleasure is absolutely ours. We're very happy to have you here. Jesus, I'll start with you. Why are you all on strike?
Well, the company's not offering us a fair contract. They always want to take concessions. They want to change our work week. And they also want to change the way of when our new members will be hired. They want them to go on a different plan with paying healthcare and with the alternative work week. So that's mainly what we're fighting for. We don't want to give concessions anymore. We already lost our pension to them because they just kind of just took it away from us, stealing money out of our pockets. So we're pretty tired of the company just taking away and just making billions like they did last year.
No, I think that's an extraordinarily important point. I mean, this is a profitable company. It's not as if they're about to go under. I think we all see their products every day, constantly, everywhere we buy them. Stephen, let me ask you this question. You're on strike. You've been a 20-year baker. Why are you out there on the line? What are the things that you'd like to see change and the givebacks that you think are unfair?
Well, actually, we just want a fair contract. Again, this is corporate greed. We made the company billions of dollars. So it's 26 billion in profits. It's just really been really crazy. It's not fair to the workers. We work hard every day, especially through the pandemic. We worked 7 days a week, 16-hour shifts. Again, a lot of management, they work from home. So, again, we put our lives in danger just coming to work every day. And again, we just want, what's fair to us. We're not asking for a lot. Again, if things could just stay the same, and of course with wage increase, but we're really not asking for much. But, I don't know. They just don't want to bend.
Well, Stephen, let me ask you this follow-up. I have to say that's 16-hour days. I mean, I think most people hearing that sounds almost unbelievable. I mean, talk to us about just what it's like going to work every day and those kind of shifts and conditions.
Again, just going to work, of course, my day starts 7:30 in the morning to 3:30 in the evening. That's a normal shift for me, my first shift. And again, when they force us over to work 16 hours, I got to work 3:30 in the evening until 11:30 at night. So that's a total of 16 hours. And again, your body gets tired. And it's good when I guess you can, it's optional, but when you're forced to work 16 hours, it gets pretty, your body gets tired. So it can take a toll on you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's similar issue, similar question to you, Jesus, in terms of your members and this issue of these work schedules. I mean, from what I understand, in sort of food production in general, these sorts of really long, harsh, difficult schedules are what the companies are trying to make the norm in a lot of ways.
Yes, well, like I said, they're trying to throw us into an alternative work week, which they'll just pay us straight time. They wouldn't pay us any overtime after 8 hours anymore. And it's difficult as it is right now. Yes, we worked at 13 to 16 hours, but at least right now we're getting compensated with the overtime, and they want to take it away too. So it's hard. I mean, trying to deal with the job and trying to be at home for a little bit. But usually, when we work those many hours, and if you work second or third shift, I don't even get to see my kids sometimes. They'll try to call me and tell me, "Can we have lunch with you, Dad, at work outside?" And whenever they can, they'll take me dinner or lunch. And it's just hard, kind of, working out of the work life and life here at home. And it gets tiring. I mean, not only do we work 13 to 16 hours, we've worked, I think, 30 days nonstop one time. Every day, 30 days with overtime, with working 13 to 16 hours a day, nonstop. So it's not only about the day. They've worked us, especially last year. Last year, I think, in my 10 years at the company, I think last year in the pandemic, that's when I've worked the most out of my 10 years in the pandemic. And they still don't appreciate it. None of our members feel appreciated or respected anymore.
I think that's such an important issue. I mean, just basic respect on the job. I think that often gets lost. I mean, a lot of people really don't fully feel that when labor disputes happen. And let me also ask you this, Jesus, what has been the feeling from people now that you are out? I mean, are people encouraged by the level of support you're getting, seeing people who are out there? I mean, I think a lot of people have really been captured by this strike and seeing what you all are doing.
Yes, we've been encouraged. We've been supported a lot by other local unions, our local electricians and engineers. They haven't crossed the picket line. They've been supporting us. They're there on the line with us. We've had local organizations supporting us, having rallies on Saturdays. We get a big crowds on Saturdays where people feel the support. People appreciate that. It's a lot of solidarity. The company thought we were going to be together because on our side here in Portland, we have a lot of new members that have been there maybe less than 5 years since we had a lot of retirees in 2016. But everybody's been together. Some people didn't even know each other because of our different departments that we have. People have been knowing each other, getting together, and it's brought us more together. We're kind of a big family now. Big family that's supporting each other. If some people need jobs, we're getting other members to give info on jobs, and we have other unions coming in that said, if you need something for the next couple of weeks, we will hire you guys to help you guys out. Anything, just let us know, and we appreciate that help. We really do, and it just kind of gives them a big boost, gives our people a big boost, knowing that we have lots of community members and organizations and other unions backing us up.
Stephen, you're there in Richmond, Virginia. Same question. I'm curious, what's the community support been like, and how have you and your fellow union members been feeling about what you're seeing?
Just to piggyback off of what Jesus said, is definitely the community is. I'm telling you, I guess being that the company is just the pillar of the community, it just was so amazing to see how much support that we got. Again, like you said, we had teachers unions, steel unions. I mean, so many our brothers and sisters come by just to support us. Even what was really special to us, some people in the community, they actually, this lady, it was really, like I said, really special. She came by, she actually baked some danishes and muffins, and she said, "Hey, listen, I just want you guys to know y'all really doing really well." And that meant a lot to us, just to see, the people in the neighborhood, just this really saying, "Hey, we're here with you guys. We fighting with you." And we had people come out, ride from DC, Washington, DC, just to come walk with us. And they said, "Hey, listen, we heard about you guys. We want to walk with you." It's like, of course, you definitely can. So the support has been tremendous. And again, it's just overwhelming. And as far as all all of us out there, we getting closer together. It's just we fellowshipping and just really, trying to get it done. And the morale is really high because again, we know what we're fighting for. We know what we deserve.
No, I think that's it. I mean, I think that's the question is what people are really fighting for and laying that out. And I think that having some understanding of who these big companies are and what
Mhm.
they're really doing. For people who don't know, this is Nabisco. So Oreos, the stuff that you are consuming on a daily basis. And I'll note, I've seen some sales go up on some of these items as well recently. And I don't think that's any sort of accident as it may be.
Mhm.
But Stephen, I wanted to ask you one other question too about that, and I really appreciate you raising the community support because you're in Virginia. Virginia's a
Mhm.
right to work state. I'm from
Right.
Charlottesville originally. Some people say, well, unions can never succeed or never do anything in
Mhm.
Virginia. It seems like this proves that there's a lot more support for the labor movement than perhaps the average everyday, sort of news report may think out there.
Correct. That is correct. And again, like I said, it's just the support is just really. I mean, it's just really we just beyond ourselves because again, they just give us that support. And again, come out, walk, drop ice, drinks, food. Even someone had an ice cream truck come out and they served us soft serve ice cream, and that one of the neighbors paid for it. They say anything they want. So again, little stuff like that means a lot to us, and it goes a long ways. And again, that kind of you look at it and say, hey, you know what? We're not just fighting for it's worth it. You know what I'm saying? It's really worth it. So yeah.
No, absolutely. Jesus, how has the company been responding in terms of negotiations? I mean, are they just sort of stonewalling people, throwing up, different kinds of offers? What's the contracting situation been? I mean, the negotiation situation been with them?
Well, right now, I think they had a conference call with our international representatives, and they called and said they wanted to talk, and all they said is, "Well, we're still upholding what we're offering you." They're just kind of playing with us. I think they're just wasting our time. Why are you calling us and then telling us, "Well, we're offering you guys the same thing. We're not taking it off the table. It's not worth it to us." That's what I'm talking about. It's just disrespectful the way they think they could just play around with us. They've also sent flyers out. I don't know if you guys at Richmond got it, saying that strike is a no win for anyone, and they're just
We
acting
got it.
like they're the good guys. They always act like they're the good guys, like we're the ones that walked out on them. Well, they've walked out on us for years. They've always been, for the last two contracts, they've been trying to take away concessions. They've been trying to go after our health care. Like I said, they took our pension away. They stole their pension. That's what it's called, stealing. And they tried to implement a 401k that all it did was trying to divide our people between the low seniority and high seniority. And we wouldn't let that happen. I always try to, I've only been there 10 years, but I always try to educate people. I've learned from my higher senior members that were there, that retired. I still learn from the ones that are there. We always talk. We're always talking, communicating, and just educating our members, our new members, and understanding what the company's trying to do, how they're trying to brainwash our new members, which they always try to do. That management is always trying to brainwash them, and we just try to keep them up to date on everything, being informative. But the company's always trying to divide us some way or another, playing games with us, and we're not going to let that happen. We're union strong, and we're not going to allow that to happen with our members.
What are some of the things they're telling the younger workers that you all are having to push back on?
They tell them, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's good for you. This is more convenient for you. You'll have a family life." What family life? When they're when they're trying to offer us 12-hour shifts at straight time, and then usually who pays for that? It's always the low senior people or the new members coming in, which that's not right. Yeah, they're just trying to make it sound good. They enticing, and, "Oh, we'll give you a bonus," but they don't tell them what they're going to take away from them. They just make it sound, like giving a little kid candy. And we're not dumb. We know how it works. We know how the game works. So we're not going to play into it. And thank thank I thank the new members for understanding and knowing that they're trying to play with them and that it's not right.
Mm-hmm. Mhm. Well, Stephen, let me ask you this before I let y'all go. I mean, it just obviously it's hard to say, but I think the company always feels like they can wear down workers when they're out on strike. But from what I'm hearing, it seems like y'all are pretty determined to stay out until you get what you deserve.
Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, the company is not budging, and we're not budging either. Because again, we deserve better. We've been working for years and days and hours, making the company billions, and it's like a slap in the face to us guys. Because again, we work hard every day. And again, I used to take pride in my job. I like my job. Don't get me wrong, I do like my job. But again, just what the company stands for. A lot of times, they're not backing, they're not taking care of their employees. That's making the money. Um, but again, hopefully, like I said, we in for the long haul. We're not bending either. Because again, like I said, it's way long overdue. We should have been did this actually. But hey, you got to start somewhere. But again, yeah, we're not bending as well.
Right on, right on. Hey, Sue, same question. Y'all are in it to win it.
Yes, we are. We're not going to give up. We're there 24/7 on the picket line. Almost everyone shows up, and we're not going to give up. If they want a long fight, we'll give them a fight. We're not going to give up on this fight at all. We've been waiting for this. Our members have been waiting for this, and the company now knows that we're not playing it either. We're not playing games with them either. We will put up a fight, and even if they don't like it.
Right on. I hear that. No contract, no snacks. I'm with that 100%.
That's right.
Stephen James, Jesus Martinez, really appreciate you guys. Appreciate everything. Thanks for giving us some time here on the freedom side.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you guys for having us and letting people, spreading out our information, letting people know what type of company Mondelez is.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Raniya, so much. Well,
thank
Raniya, there it is right there. Corporate America is the greediest of the greedy. People working 16-hour days, 30 days straight one time working.
That's
I mean,
insane.
and this is every time you eat
That
an
is
Oreo,
insane.
open up one of these crackers from Nabisco. Mondelez is a big corporation based out of France. They own Nabisco. So if you see any sales on Nabisco products this week, it's a trick to try to break these workers who you just saw who are out there just
100% amazing, and also incredible the level of solidarity across state lines for workers, not just in Virginia but in other parts of the country, striking over this. Is strikes are not common in America these days. So really incredible stuff happening. I just very quickly, Eugene, want
please, we have some news
to
updates.
update
Important
people
ones.
on Afghanistan.
Please.
Since we did open talking about Afghanistan, and we will be speaking to Ann Wright at the in a little bit. So for those who are here to hear about Afghanistan, we will get to more of that just quickly. It has been confirmed that there are multiple explosions in Kabul. I believe it's around the airport, but still not entirely verified exactly where and what's going on. Just that there are explosions. And also possibly gun battles. Still, the details about that are still coming in, so I don't want to say anything that isn't true, but not just at the airport, maybe other parts of Kabul as well. There's also reports that ex-Afghan special forces are involved, which could mean, I'm not, I don't know if this is ISIS or if this is people trying to fight the Taliban, but given that there was this attack that was carried out by the ISIS affiliate in Afghanistan, it could be related to that. So we'll let you guys know more details as it comes in. But very quickly, before we move on to the next topic, I just wanted to note that the Middle East bureau chief of the Washington Post,
Who is that now? It's not Liz Sly, is it? Is it?
Liz Sly.
Oh, Lord.
Liz Sly has tweeted something that I just need to bring attention to, because this should be taught in school as an example of just like American hubris and like self-involvement. So she tweets, "The Forever War began with a terrorist attack that killed Americans. It is ending 20 years later, attack that killed Americans." So I just want to say, the attack she's referring to at the Kabul airport killed 60 Afghans at least, and that number will likely rise. Yes, it killed 12 American service members, which is terrible as well. But also, in that 20-year period she just described from beginning to end, she left out the millions of Afghans, Iraqis, Yemenis, Syrians, Somalis, and on and on and on that were killed in this forever war. I mean, just to start your sentence like that, it started with the killing of Americans and ended with that. No one else died in between.
I mean, wow.
No one else that matters, apparently. That's the Middle East bureau chief. You can imagine the kind of lens she has when she's covering the region that I also live in.
Yeah.
And
I mean, do you think she does a good job on a normal? And
yeah.
Do you think she does a good job at that? And covering the region?
Terrible job. Terrible. Horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible. I mean, just we'll have to have a whole entire live stream devoted to just that.
No, I actually am all for that. I mean, you could see from my reaction when I said, "Is it Liz Sly?" Like, I mean, there's really no newspaper in America that is more neocon, but like not considered neocon than the Washington Post.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of slides. People say, "Oh, it's a liberal," blah blah blah. But anyway, we'll come back to Afghanistan. But important issue.
Yeah.
More attacks there, more blasts at the airport. There's gonna be more information coming out. All the death tolls you're seeing are certainly going to arise. Also, wanted to shout out Black Freud, who said not one step back when they donated during the Nabisco workers, and I appreciate that. I'm sure they appreciate that. I agree with you 100%. It seems like they're in it to win it for sure. So, don't forget, no contract, no snacks. Don't buy Oreos. Don't be out here buying these Nabisco products, especially if they're on sale. Just remember that. But we do want to turn our attention now to another extremely important issue. Well, on a number of different fronts, whether it concerns the rights of Indigenous people in this country, the issues of climate change in this country, certainly the intersection between the two. And we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show here by Tara Houska, who is a leader in the Indigenous-led resistance against the Line 3 pipeline. Tara, thank you so much for being with us.
Afternoon, I guess, to you both.
Right on. Well, thanks so much for joining us again. And, I think maybe just for those who don't know, could you just give us a brief primer on what the Line 3 pipeline is and why people are opposed to it?
Yeah, is the dirtiest fossil fuel in the world, coming out of Alberta, Canada, passing through many, many Indigenous nations along its route. And the portion that's been fought so fiercely has been a section here in what's now Minnesota by the many nations along its route here. We are fighting because it is a threat to our way of life. It passes through our treaty territories in Anishinaabe, King, and the headwaters of the Mississippi River. It terminates at the shore of Lake Superior, passes through over 200 bodies of water, 800 wetlands. 85% of the water in the United States, or in what's now the United States, begins here in Minnesota. That's the amount of water that this would impact if there was a critical spill. Enbridge is responsible for the largest spill in U.S. history, and the largest inland spill, and the second largest inland spill in U.S. history. So they're not a company that has behaved well over time.
Wow. And what has been the response of, the company, their security guards, local police to the level of this resistance in terms of the repression they've been putting on the work of those who have been fighting back?
Yeah, I'm actually just coming to you from a direct action that occurred this morning. There is a blockade of water protectors suspended from an aerial blockade over at a pump station, a place that electrifies the pipeline. Tar sands is actually a sludge, and so it requires an enormous amount of electricity to actually send it through the pipe. Police were using pain compliance on people this morning, so zip tying them while they were suspended in the air, jerking on their bodies. The two people that were inside actually almost fell to the ground. Ripped them out while we were screaming at the top. That's one instance. They dislocated someone's jaw a couple weeks ago. Jesus. They've been using rubber bullets, mace, you name it. It's been deployed out here in northern Minnesota. I was hit with rubber bullets a couple weeks ago and maced and all those things. And these guys are billing to Enbridge at the end of the day too. So like every time they are out protecting the pipeline, they get to turn around and bill back to a escrow account that's run by the state but funded by Enbridge. They've billed over $2 million. Police have to this private industry at this point.
Wow, that's okay, man. Well, I think that sadly, the level of repression, I think, on water protectors and others is, maybe some of the most significant in the country. But, I also wanted to ask you, and I think this is a crucially important element of this. I mean, I think people, when they think of pipeline resistance, they pretty much only think of climate change. But I mean, this really is also a major issue in terms of the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples, it seems, as well. And I was hoping you could talk about that.
Yeah, we are obviously engaged in the fight against climate crisis, the existential threat that is all around us in every part of the world at this point, including North America, finally. We've been fighting a tar sands pipeline under smoky skies. The forests above us have been burning. The forests to the west of us have been burning. And to the east of us, there's these major floods that have been occurring all summer long. As we're in a record drought in northern Minnesota, the rivers are empty, and Enbridge has been draining 5 billion gallons of water out of the rivers to build its tar sands pipeline. We know all of that, yet there's also these pieces of what Indigenous people around the globe are really trying to say, which is we're the people that are still connected to the land. We're the people 80% of its biodiversity globally. We're 5% of the population holding 80% of the biodiversity. That's not by accident. It's not by happenstance. It's because we never lost those connections. We never lost that understanding that the earth is our relative. It's not a resource. And when it comes to something like this, it's just colonization in a new form and a new face. And it's a continuation of extraction from our people and coming for these last beautiful places that we hold, coming for the last bits of life that are left on this earth that can sustain us, that are still habitable. That's what we're fighting for, and that's what we're trying to stand up for. And it's pretty appalling to see President Biden centering himself as this climate president, as a defender of Indigenous sovereignty, as a respecter of tribal nations, when there are 3 tribal nations that have been suing against this project since the beginning. There have been hundreds and hundreds of people arrested in this struggle. I think a lot of folks are familiar with the fight over at Standing Rock and the Dakota Access Pipeline. There were 800 people arrested in that fight. I was one of them. There have been close to 800 arrested in this fight during the pandemic. We have continued on understanding that they are not listening to legislation, to regulation, to political pressure, but they do listen to our bodies being on the line. So that's what we've been doing all these years and months.
Do you have any political support on this? The squad type, the squad members, I guess, come to mind. Has there been an attempt to reach out to them, and have they taken a stance on this?
Yeah, the progressives have been supportive. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who's from Minnesota, has actually been in this camp. Was out here when it was still cold out, standing a couple feet from where I am right now. So there has been support. And presidential candidate Bernie Sanders took a stance against it in 2016 again when he ran in 2020. Or sorry, 2020. Man, it's hard to keep track of what time we're even in. It just keeps going and going.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's been support. I think that what's happening is there is so much happening in the world, and there's so much ugliness and so much disrespect of human life, as some enjoy comforts at the expense of others, and some enjoy human rights at the expense and knowing of others not receiving those same basic human rights. And there's so much going on that it's hard to break through into that national sphere. I mean, we've gained the support. It's just it's not been reflected in the political system that decides.
Mm-hmm. And for people who are watching, who maybe are just learning about this or just hearing about this, I mean, what kind of support do you need? Can people offer, and how should they go about it?
So we're nearing the end of construction. We are continuing to resist, obviously, as I just came from something this morning, and there was another blockade actually earlier this week that was led by Indigenous femmes and Two-Spirit folks. Successfully blockaded a man camp for 12 hours. That was pretty gnarly to see and pretty inspiring, especially given that Enbridge, the company behind this pipeline project, has already been busted a couple different times in sex trafficking rings. When these projects come, they also bring lots and lots of workers with them from other places. And there's harm borne by our people in real time. Besides the environmental harms and degradation, there's also the real cost of violence and sexual violence increasing in our communities. So I think, the hope is that, one, we can keep bailing people out of jail. I encourage people to check out stopline3bailfunds.org. The bail has been insane. The state is definitely using that tactic to try to drain us of resources. We're talking like 10, 20,000 per person.
Ooh.
Sometimes bail is in the network of like $100,000, $200,000 for just a couple of people getting out of jail. The level of repression has been very significant also. So the legal fees part of it is really important. We're telling people to call on Biden. We're telling people to push on Gina McCarthy. We're telling people to use whatever platforms and connections they have to reach out to these decision makers. But I think there's also a sense, at least from our collective, for people to find their bravery and to recognize what's really happening and to have that agency, because we are people who have been almost genocided out of existence, and we need people to stand with us. And we're the ones that are carrying a lot of these fights around the globe when it comes to protection of the land. And I have the privilege to be in North America where we're not openly assassinated for this work, but in other places around the globe, that is not the case. They're openly killed for trying to defend their own land. And so that ability and bravery of bringing your body and your freedom and your privilege to frontline struggle is really needed. Yeah, the petitions aren't working.
No, I hear you 100%. I mean, I think that if there's ever a moment for, escalation in that sense, this is certainly that moment, given everything, that we've seen in the seriousness. Well, Tara, I know you have a lot going on, but before I let you go, just any final words you want to say to our listeners?
There is a lot happening in the world, and it can be overwhelming, and it can lead to of disconnection, I think, and how do I process all of this? How do I find empathy and still remain myself and still be okay knowing that there's so much atrocity happening? There is so much beauty too. And there's beauty in, I guarantee, like the mutual aid circles that are forming in Afghanistan, in other places, the beautiful solidarity between land defenders, the beautiful solidarity with folks that are leading struggles against police brutality and systemic racism and all these issues and societal ills that are everywhere. Workers' rights, like that was what was happening before this, right? Like that was the segment before this. I think when people come into these places and spaces, they find that love and that connection that so many of us have, I think, had pushed away from us through society as it exists now, which is extractivism. So find your way to frontline struggle and, find your bravery and find your heart and stand up for what's true.
Right on. Tara Houska, really appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
All right. Thank you much. Keep going, man.
Right on. Thank you. Well, Rania, I mean, I feel like we just go back to back to back with, terrible stories. But I thought the way that, Tara ended it there was right. That people can resist, people can fight back. There is a lot of beauty that there is in the world, especially in collective resistance. Also, want to just give a quick shout out to Hawk PB. Thank you so much for your donation, by the way. For the earth to live, capitalism must end. Thank you for having Tara on. We need climate solutions that are collective in action, not individual. Much love to the water protectors. Thank you so much for that comment.
not
Thank
agree
you so
more.
much for that donation. I really appreciate it. I think it's absolutely crucial in many different ways. The donation, of course, but also
And really, I'm so excited that we get to cover this issue because it's not receiving the coverage it deserves, likely because of the crowd in office right now.
Yeah.
I imagine if it was, and I think Tara's right, there's like a lot happening in the world, but
But if the governor
also
was like
know-
some pro-Trump somebody,
Yeah.
Not Tim Walz, who's like, a so-called good liberal, you would probably be able to get a little bit more traction on this because the mainstream media would know how to frame it, but they don't know how to frame or don't want to frame, particular things in particular ways. I mean, the fact that only one congressperson has been out there. And I mean, Minnesota has many congresspeople. And this is nowhere close to where Ilhan Omar's district is. No, go ahead.
Right. And then, but I think your point about Trump is important because I think the media still has Trump derangement syndrome. He's not even in the public eye anymore because he's like been erased from social media, but they're still obsessed with him. I mean, every late night show, it's all about Trump. Everything that the only way the media knows how to cover anything is Trump, anti-Trump.
Yeah.
He's gone. He's not even president anymore. It's really the damage that's been done to the national conversation in the Trump era, post-Trump era, has, I think, been extremely devastating for people who are active on issues that should be at the top of the agenda, given the consequences of allowing a pipeline like this to go forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I really think that people should do whatever they can, lift their voices however they can. This is obviously absolutely critical. I mean, a huge amount of water, bodies of water are under attack. The wild rice harvest there, which is also a major Native American piece. So anyway, long story short, do what you can to support the resistors at Line 3. Well, while we're talking about the issue of Indigenous rights, I think that this is, in a way, a good segue to our next story. I wanted to check in really, at least principally, on what's been happening in Peru as of late. We talked about this, a little bit in the show right before the election in Peru. Of course, Mr. Castillo became the president there, really representing a lot of the rural, indigenous, deeply impoverished communities there, and of course has been under quite a bit of attack. So on that note, I want to bring back a guest we actually had on during or just before the elections there in Peru. That's Dennis Rogachuk, who is a journalist and editor in Latin America for El Ciudadano Media, as well as Jacobin America Latina. Dennis, thank you so much for being back with us, man.
Eugene, Rania, thanks for inviting me back on.
No, the pleasure is all ours. And I wanted to start here with Peru because I think that sort of the eyes of the world have moved on a little bit, but it does seem as if Pedro Castillo has been facing quite a bit of attacks on him, of course, but his foreign minister has been forced to resign. I mean, what are you seeing here, Dennis, in Peru, and what do you think it portends for how Castillo will or will not be able to govern?
Well, I think it's a good. We should really start with a bit of a background as to what Castillo had to confront even beforehand, even before assuming the presidency, because we have to remember that this legal tag of war between him and Keiko Fujimori basically left him with only just 1 week of transition before he could assume the presidency on July 28th, if I'm not mistaken. So this was all everybody predicted. This was always gonna be a not just very chaotic transition, but also a very chaotic start to to the left-wing presidency, the first left-wing presidency that the country has had since the military government of General Velasco in the 1970s. So the expectation always was that Pedro Castillo would have to confront the four key levers, or four pillars of power in among the the right wing of the oligarchy of Peru. Number one is the armed forces, particularly the Navy, and we'll get to that just in a bit. Number two is the Congress, where the right wing and the liberal and the centrist political forces have around about two-thirds of majority, which means that at any point in time they could actually force a vote of no confidence in the president and try to overthrow him that way, the same way that it was done to the two presidents beforehand. Number three is, of course, the Lima-based metropolitan oligarchy there, and the four is of course just the actual the Peruvian state itself that has really been engineered throughout the 1990s and the early 2000s by Alberto Fujimori and sort of his people, as a machine for the extermination of social movements and political activists all around the country. So trying to gain political power and also gain state power in that context, we always knew it was going to be hard. But what happened in the case of the dismissal of the canciller or the foreign minister is quite interesting, because he was effectively nominated. He was one of the most left-wing, not just left-wing political figures, but also one of the most left-wing academics who was considered at that time, as well as being a guerrilla fighter in the 60s and 70s. And I think there was at one point there was even this. It was even considered that he was actually a part of Che Guevara's guerrilla movement back in Bolivia. I believe. I may not. Don't quote me on that. Yes. But Hector Bejar effectively became a casualty in this new struggle between Castillo and what you call the Peruvian state. Yet the response of Castillo to that has been twofold. On one side, we're now seeing some of the other candidates that he's going for seem to be far less, revolutionary, or far less aligned to his interest, far more aligned to the interest of the state. But on the other hand side, there was another important development lately in Peru, and this has to do with Vladimir Montesinos, who was the chief of intelligence. Chief of intelligence in Alberto Fujimori's government, and who for a long time was also managed the intelligence of Keiko Fujimori, and who was actually discovered during this time period between the presidency and the assumption this time period between the election and the assumption of presidency by Pedro Castillo, to have actually really fueled and been sort of the man behind organizing these fraud claims against Castillo. So Castillo's move has been to move him from where he currently is, which was a military prison overseen by the Navy, to a maximum security prison it's administered by the state. So this was kind of a signal, like a warning shot fired by Castillo against the military, against more specifically the Navy, as a way of saying that this is not this is not how things will be done anymore with us in charge.
One of the things that I think has also sort of come out of this that we've seen early in the Castillo government, but that certainly has some repercussions maybe for what it means for the region, is that when the former, now deposed foreign minister was there, one of the first things they announced was that they were leaving the Lima group. I don't even know what it would call itself now, but also, of course, along with St. Lucia. Now, obviously, of course, the Lima group had been the most maybe aggressive front in the war of various types, sort of multi-level hybrid war on left-wing movements and governments in Latin America. I mean, how significant is it to you, Dennis, that not only that Peru sort of left, but being kind of the namesake of the Lima group? I mean, does it signal something broader about the relationship of forces in the continent?
I think definitely. I believe that one of the aftershocks of this decision has actually been the initiation of the dialogue between the Venezuelan government and the right-wing opposition, which has been facilitated in Mexico and being facilitated by the government of AMLO. But this is something that I believe really was only possible because Lima Group hasn't just lost key members, Mexico, Argentina, Peru, Saint Lucia, some of the other small countries, but also because it's like the balance across the continent has really shifted towards anti-interventionism by the United States and by the main sort of forums that it controls, the OAS being one of them. And furthermore to this, I believe it also speaks of the decline of the OAS as an effective actor that could promote interventions, military, political, or economic overall. As we've been seeing recently that Luis Almagro, particularly, who's been one of the biggest proponents of intervention into Venezuela, one of the conspirators and one of the godfathers of the coup in Bolivia, sanctions against Nicaragua, against Cuba, whatnot. He is as well now being squeezed in his own forum and actually forced to confront the reality of the situation. So I reckon, and Peru was, I wouldn't say Peru was the real answer to this, but this was certainly the game changer. This is what prompted this final change in balance that we are now witnessing here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you brought up the issue of Venezuela, and just to touch on that quickly, I mean, tell us about the significance from your point of view about these negotiations. I mean, it seems like at the very least, it's almost the death knell of this sort of Guaido-style interventionist reality in Venezuelan politics.
Well, Juan Guaido never had any actual proper place in Venezuelan politics to start with, any kind of effective structure or any political presence that was actually taken seriously, and by the Venezuelan opposition itself, particularly the last year or so. So the dialogues that are taking place in Mexico right now are a clear sign that that this the governance. Well, I'm trying to think of all the phrases that Guaido has been described by. I'll say this political ventriloquism. This political ventriloquism has come is coming to a definitive end.
I heard that Guaido appointed himself president of Afghanistan. Just throwing that out there. That's what I heard. I don't know.
Well,
I love that. No, I love it. That's become a thing every time anything happens in any country or there's any election anywhere. That's like nobody knows who won. People are like, Juan Guaido. It's just become a meme. That's what he's been successful at, actually.
Yeah, very much so.
A meme.
Because the only person who I can think of who is still kind of clinging on to the Guaido illusion is Leopoldo Lopez, and so he may be the only ally which Guaido has left in the wider politics of the Venezuelan right wing opposition. But all of the others, even the more extreme ones, like Freddy Guevara, who was a terrorist, also a terrorist just like Leopoldo Lopez, he has joined the dialogues in Mexico, and he was actually given a bit of a welcome by Nicolas Maduro as a sign of just very broad swaths of the opposition. I've given up on the Guaido coup, and now kind of realizing that perhaps sitting down with Nicolas would be a good idea.
Well, let me ask you this final question, and I think it speaks to the role Mexico's playing. I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that could be said, certainly about AMLO and the government, but certainly it does seem that the assumption of AMLO of the presidency has had a major effect on the region in terms of the broader balance of power and the ability to sort of leverage also against powerful nations like the United States and Spain.
Certainly, no, certainly, Eugene. Well, I think one way we can actually, one way in which we can back this up is to look at the last meeting of the foreign ministers of CELAC, or the Community of the Caribbean and Latin American Nations, which took place in Mexico just before the start of this dialogue. At that meeting, AMLO gave a speech, gave one of the best speeches with regards to foreign relations and international relations that I've heard, where he emphasized number one, the lifting of the blockade against Cuba, and this is something that he urged the entire Latin American community of nations to back. Number two, say the end of interventionism in the affairs of Latin American nations, and not just the global South in particular, but I think what he called to be the imperial powers. But the third one was the most important, where he effectively called for the abolition of the OAS and its replacement by CELAC. And this is a speech. This is something that hasn't really been proposed by a leader of a major nation like Mexico ever. This is the first time. This is the first time where you have a major power really stepping in and committing to building a project that encompasses the entire nation. It is important to note that the first serious attempt took place with the unification of South America. It was in the early to the late in the first decades of the 21st century, with the leadership of Lula, the leadership of Nestor Kirchner, the leadership of Chavez. And I think it's important to acknowledge that as a key important step. But what was done by AMLO and what is being done by Mexico's government, as I believe something that could potentially be bigger and more successful than the project that was started by the big three of the UNASURs. It doesn't just encompass all of Latin America, but also it seeks it's one of its clear objectives is to replace the imperialist project that was founded by the United States. So
absolutely. Well, Dennis, really appreciate you joining us again here, giving us a little bit of a round about there on Latin America. Certainly would be interested to have you back on both this and other issues. I know you got some interesting reporting trips coming up around the world, but thanks again, man, for giving us a little bit of time here on the Freedom Side.
It's always a pleasure, Eugene. Rania.
Please, pleasure's all ours. Well, Rania, what can you say? I mean, the level of struggle going on around the world is massive. The attempts to prevent people's movements from doing anything. I think that's always my takeaway from sort of our current situation there in Latin America, but at least I think more hopeful in many ways than some might say, given some of the progressive governments in the region.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it stands to be seen what happens going forward. It's hard to keep track, honestly, of so many different regions. A lot is happening in terms of geopolitical shifting. Definitely. Especially in recent weeks, and now we're going to turn to one major geopolitical shift.
No, of course,
that recently took place.
I mean, this is the biggest story around the world, continuing to be a big story. I don't know exactly where we are, Rania, on the issue of the blast at the airport, if we have any more updates or anything like that. But for those who may have missed it, there have been now 2 terrorist attacks, I believe, at the Kabul airport.
There's a report that there was a report of other explosions, but now it looks like the Taliban is saying that the recent blast heard in Kabul was a controlled explosion by the U.S. military, who were destroying ammunition. And of course, that rattled everybody because of what happened earlier. It was near the airport blast area, but not at the airport. So I guess it's not a second attack, but of course the damage from that first attack is still taking place. I'm just looking at these, American news outlets. They all lead with 12 U.S. service members. And
Yeah.
I understand Americans care more about that, but, up to 60 Afghans, likely more by the end of this, will have been killed in this blast. So
Absolutely.
it's just always strange to me to lead with the smaller number of casualties just because of their nationality. But anyways.
No, I hear you, for sure. It's an important issue in terms of how it's covered. Well, let's bring in Colonel Ann Wright here. Many people know Colonel Ann Wright, of course, as an anti-war activist on a range of different issues. Also, many of us know her for the bold stand she took resigning from the U.S. State Department in protest against the war in Iraq. Ann, thank you so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you on another strange day in Afghanistan, tragic day in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And I think
it really
Rania
is.
Exactly Please. Right. We need to remember the people that supposedly were trying to get out of there, and the ones that died, 60 of them as a minimum, as they try to flee what one anticipates will not be a very progressive government.
It really is. I mean, there's so many different elements to this and so many different threads to pull on, but maybe I just want to start. I mean, seeing this attack here at the airport, I mean, how have you felt about the way the Biden administration has gone about this? I mean, I think most people agree that the war in Afghanistan should absolutely end, but it just seems that on so many different levels, I don't know, maybe how can it end? And it certainly can never end in a good way after 20 years of occupation, but it's just sort of heaping insult onto injury as we also process out.
Well, the supposed intelligence failure, which meant that the U.S. government was a little surprised when the Taliban was able to walk into Kabul and essentially, take over everything with Kabul to include the airport, and then that triggering the massive numbers of people who said, "Get me out of here! I don't want to be here with the Taliban," and tons of people with tens of thousands going to the airport. The lack of real processing that first did not occur under the Trump administration after the deal was signed with the Taliban, and then under the 8 months of the Biden administration, so little processing done of the men and women that had worked for the U.S. government, who we had said, yes, we'll try to get you out of there. I myself have been involved in an evacuation of a U.S. embassy before. 25 years ago in 1997, I was the acting ambassador in Sierra Leone when, because of a violent coup against the elected government, we needed to evacuate the international community. And it was chaotic. Thousands, not tens or hundreds of thousands of Sierra Leoneans wanted to go, but plenty that came to the hotel where we were staging the evacuation, which meant that helicopters from a big Navy ship were flying in and then taking people out to the ship and trying to determine who should go, who were American citizens, who were international workers, who were this, that, and the other thing, was traumatic. And I think I probably still have a little PTSD from that, now seeing the massive, incredible numbers of people that have arrived at the airport in Kabul, and the over 100,000, which is just an unbelievable number, that have been moved out of Kabul in a period of, 7 days. It is unbelievable. And the tragedy today of the explosions by probably ISIS-K, something that the U.S. intel people got right, that there were going to be attacks on this operation. It's a real tragedy for the people of Afghanistan, for the young men and women of our U.S. military who were there to try to do this humanitarian airlift. So it's a very tragic day.
It is a very tragic day indeed. But I am curious, and we had spoken a few weeks ago about, obviously, before the Taliban had retaken Kabul, about concerns about what that might look like. And so far, I have to say I've been somewhat impressed. I mean, it's very early to tell, but I've been impressed with the smoothness of this transition, if you can call it that. Um, Especially with the Taliban's discipline so far. I mean, they have yet to and might not, as they've stated, target those who work for the government. They have said that they will still allow people to leave. They have the proper paperwork. And then I'm hearing from people on the ground that, so far, people who are very fearful of the Taliban, that despite that fear, so far at least, they haven't done anything insane. They're not going around, executing people, which is what people very much feared, rightly so. So I'm curious from your vantage point, I mean, are you impressed, I guess, with the level of discipline shown by the Taliban? And furthermore, do you think this was a smooth transition given how chaotically the US did leave?
Well, the fact that the Afghan military essentially crumbled in the face of the Taliban taking province by province by province, and then arriving on the outskirts of Kabul, and men and women of the military and the national police that the U.S. had trained over many years, essentially saying, well, this isn't going to go well for us, and we're going to just kind of disappear and live to fight another day, and maybe under the Taliban, maybe, who knows. But the fact that there was no battle for Kabul has saved thousands of lives. It's yet to be seen whether or not the warlords, the militias, of many of the people that were in the former government. I mean, the government was filled with warlords who, over decades, had been raping, pillaging, and plundering the country. General Dostum being one of them, who was at one stage the Minister of Defense and then the Vice President, and Atta Mohammed up in Mazar Sharif, and then we've got the son of Ahmed Massoud that's over in the Panjshir Valley. There's Hekmatyar, who is a part of the Haqqani network that is apparently thrown in now with the Taliban. But there are a lot of groups that are out there that have weapons, that have used them on the civilian communities before. Right now, I think we're all kind of shocked that the Taliban has, in its own words, has matured, that they are not quite the same group that they were 20 years ago in 1996 to 2001 when they were in charge, that they have a little more enlightened approach to the civilian society, although that's yet to be seen because, as you mentioned, there are incidents that we're hearing about where there have been some executions. There have been Taliban that have been going door to door, knocking on people's doors, leaving notes. We know who you are. We know what you've done, and you're going to be dead. So, and then the issue of letting girls go to school, that apparently young girls are still able to go in most cities. But women that work for the government are being told, no, don't come to work because you are a woman and we are not having you come here, even though the Taliban has requested that former or government employees return to their work. So there's a lot that's still out. And then the key thing right now for today is whether or not the agreement that they signed with the Trump administration that is being implemented by the Biden administration, that indeed the Taliban will not allow the soil of Afghanistan to be used by a terrorist group, foreign fighters, things like that. Well, we're already seeing today, they're allegedly the people that committed the suicide attacks are probably from ISIS and probably have a lot of foreign fighters aligned with them. So it is a much quieter scene on one level than we ever anticipated, but certainly the jury is out of what will happen in the future.
And speaking of what will happen in the future, so far, the U.S., of course, has imposed sanctions. On this new government, it's frozen the Afghan National Treasury funds, which could have a terrible snowballing effect on the economy in a already pretty situation. I mean, overnight, basically, an economy that's dependent on outside aid, it was already going to crumble because all that outside aid is leaving with the end of this occupation. So to freeze the treasury fund, that is really just, to suffocate the country in such a really, just awful, disgusting way. But with this new attack that just happened today, it does seem as though the U.S. is going to have to, at least temporarily, look to the Taliban as some sort of counter-terrorism type force with this ISIS threat, especially are still at the Kabul airport. And you recently wrote this piece and wrote a letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, arguing or asking that they please leave the U.S. embassy open. So can you explain to our viewers why you wrote that letter and what's your reasoning behind that?
Well, if we really care about the people of Afghanistan, which is supposedly, one of the reasons that we stayed in Afghanistan, not the reason we went in there to start with, which was reportedly to go after Al-Qaeda. And, oh, by the way, we'll try to move the Taliban out of the government. But then for the next 19 years, it was, well, we care for the people of Afghanistan and we want health, education, social services, da. So if you really care about the people of Afghanistan, then those types of programs from the United States, I think, ought to continue. And the only way they can do that is if the U.S. Embassy is open. The country now has a new government, a de facto new government. It may not be the government that the U.S. wanted, but it is in power. It does have its own security network that is working with the U.S., although they all failed today when that suicide bomber made it through all these checkpoints and got right up to the gate and blew themselves up. But even the director of the U.S. CIA was in Kabul for the last 2 days talking with the Taliban. We've had extensive continuing talks with the Taliban, what's left of it in Doha, where over 18 months, a large number of U.S. government officials from the State Department, Department of Defense, CIA, you name an agency, and they probably had a delegate that was a part of the negotiating team that was in Doha talking to the Taliban. So it's not like the senior leadership of the Taliban are an unknown quantity to U.S. And to Afghan officials. What's also interesting is that the former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, has already had a senior Taliban delegation over to his home, and they've talked about, who knows what they've talked about. Abdullah, who was the co-executive with Ashraf Ghani in the last government, was involved in that discussion at Hamid Karzai's house. And then, interestingly, the brother of Ashraf Ghani, the former president, has had senior level Taliban over to his home for hospitality. So behind the scenes, there's a lot of discussion going on, I think, about having some sort of a coalition type government, which would be much more acceptable to the international community. And if that comes to pass, I would think, and I would hope, and as I argued in that article about keeping the embassy open, we should not be doing our own retribution and retaliation because yet one more small military force has forced the United States to withdraw from a country. It seems to be kind of the history of the U.S. And usually we do take retribution, retaliation. We put horrible sanctions that hurt the people. There are some, they hurt the senior leadership on some levels, but senior leadership of all these countries know how to get money for themselves. It's the common person that suffers. So if we really do mean what we say, that we care for the people of Afghanistan, then we the U.S. need to release the funds that are the funds of the Afghan people. And we need to put pressure on the IMF and the World Bank and the G7 and any other countries that have had aid programs in Afghanistan. Because, as you say, the economy of Afghanistan is totally dependent on international help. There essentially not an economy that can support governmental functions in Afghanistan. They need help. And if we want to help the people of Afghanistan, we need to keep that embassy open.
Well, I think you raised such an important point, Anne, in terms of what does it really mean to care? What does it really mean to play a positive role? And it seems that even though the media doesn't seem to be learning anything from this, that really a big lesson of this is that the only way for there to be some form of peace in Afghanistan is to give up this sort of US, British great game approach to Central Asia of trying to determine everything that every country in the region is going to do.
Well, you're exactly right. The latest empire to fall victim to the great game syndrome is us. And the Brits were a part of it. The Soviets were a part of it. We are a part of it. One would hope that we learn our lesson, but we've certainly, if we know our own history, we know that successive administrations will ignore lessons learned. And our role as activists and concerned citizens is to keep pressure on our U.S. politicians and remind them of the history of our country, the pitiful history of thinking that military actions are what are needed to resolve political and economic issues.
Well, and since I brought it up, I'm just curious your thoughts about how the media has been treating this issue. I mean, I don't know why I'm surprised, but I guess I have been a little surprised at how many of the people who got us into this mess have been resurrected as the people we should be listening to about what's happening now.
Oh, isn't that the truth? You would think that the media would have a little more sense than calling on the warmongers that got us into this mess. I mean, there's a whole raft of us that were protesting at various levels on all of these wars, and we were right. But who do they bring on? They bring on the people that were wrong. But it's the fallacy of our own commercial media, because those people still have great influence. They still have great influence in the Washington arena. They're all members of think tanks. You would think think tanks would kick all these people that are wrong out. Like, we don't want to hear you anymore. You were wrong. But no, they just keep paying them. And then the big military contracts that go out with all of this stuff, these guys and gals have benefited from them, and the big corporations know who they are and know that they can be bent to say virtually anything that the big corporations need to have said in order to sell more weapons to both the U.S. and to other countries.
Mm-hmm.
It is really, I was just going to say, it is also just incredible to see this debate happening again. We need to go. You get the sense from the media that they really feel like we need to go back into Afghanistan and save Afghans, as if we weren't there for 20 years destroying the country. Like, you had 20 years of an American occupation that didn't save Afghans. Why would that suddenly change now? And it got me thinking. Go ahead, Anne. Go ahead.
Well, don't you know what's going on in Fox News? Holy crap. They are probably demanding that we put a nuclear bomb right on the airport in Kabul and get rid of everybody. We don't care who was there, but let's go after whoever killed U.S. servicemen and women. And of course, as you're saying, never saying, well, one of the reasons that this has happened, here's the kind of the history of it, and the way you prevent further loss of life is getting us out of there. As the Nobel Peace Laureate from Afghanistan, Malala Joya, said, that there were three enemies to Afghanistan. One was the Taliban, one was the government of Afghanistan's military forces, and the other was the U.S. Well, 2 out of 3 of them should be out of there by the end of the week. And so they're only left with one enemy. And she said, and we can probably handle that one. If it's only one we have to go after, but 3 of them, there was never any hope for us, the citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's just, it got me thinking, I can't really think of any American military adventure that made things better. And that's left out of this conversation, of course. Like, just going through the last 30 years, it's really a struggle. You know, it's one failure. I mean, depending on what you call a failure, obviously people made bank. But I mean, in terms of if you're judging by where people helped, every country the US military has gone into has ended up worse off afterwards. So the fact that we're even hearing this lie repeated over and over again, as if the US military can act as some force for good, is just astonishing after all this, especially after all the devastation that's been done in the last 20 years with the war on terror.
Well, indeed, the war on terror has been a terrible terror war to the people of all of the Middle East. I mean, what the U.S. has done in the name of terror, which is terrorize various countries and overthrow their governments, and the level of human rights violations that the United States has done, still keeping Guantanamo open. Here it is 20 years later and 39 people still there. The numbers of people in, all over the world that were put into dark sites, and the curtailment of civil liberties here in the United States under the Patriot Act. I mean, it's been a horrible, horrible period in the life of the United States, which has wreaked havoc on the lives of so many people around the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, Colonel Ann Wright, as always, really appreciate you joining us, giving us some of your thoughts here, giving us some of your time on the freedom side.
Well, thank you. And if you want to help support keeping the U.S. Embassy open in Afghanistan, we do have a petition up under Code Pink Women for Peace, and it links to my article and my letter to Secretary of State Blinken. And in a period of 24 hours, I think we have about 3,000 signatures. So we could use more. And every day I'll be sending that number to the State Department to say, someone of you all, get that on Blinken's desk, please.
Right on. No, I appreciate you as always, Ann.
Thank you. Thanks, Eugene and Rania. Thank you.
Well, Rania, I mean, it really is just, hopefully Blinken, honestly, if they were listening to Colonel Ann Wright, we wouldn't really be in this issue in the first place, by the way. Long history. She was opposing the Somalia intervention in the early 90s, the Black Hawk Down, from the inside, consistently trying to tell them don't do all these ridiculous things they're doing. So it's not as if they don't have the information. I think that's always something that's important about these various, warmongers. It's not as if, even though, as we all remember the chorus, if I knew then what I knew now.
Right
I remember that was Hillary Clinton's big thing about Iraq, I was wrong, but I didn't have all the information. And we were telling you then.
Mm-hmm. No, it's totally a matter of listening to what reaffirms your views and punishing whoever challenges those views. And that's why, like we mentioned, people like Anne are not on Sunday morning news shows, despite their experience and history of being repeatedly right.
Yes.
While the Lindsey Grahams, I almost said John McCain's, but
I mean, whatever, we can throw him in. Just also, of course, on the way out, and as you can see on the bottom there, at least 60 Afghans killed in what looks like 2 suicide bombers struck a crowd. I'm just trying to get the details right here, so apologize for looking down. 2 suicide bombers struck a packed crowd outside of the Hamid Karzai International Airport. It's amazing that the airport is named after Karzai. Nevertheless, it's going to be more than 60 at the end of the day. Many news agencies around the world are now just reporting scores of Afghans killed. And whenever you see scores of people killed being reported, that means that it's probably going to be upwards of 100, but people don't know exactly what. Of course, these are all very chaotic situations here. After these bombings, there have been 12 U.S. Marines have been killed as well. Navy corpsman was killed. So I suspect that the toll, we'll be here for a few more minutes, but I suspect that the toll is going to continue to go up in a very significant way. There could sort of be some secondary attacks here. I mean, this is really one of the things that I think a lot of people who have been following this conflict have been noting over the past several years, as ISIS has tried to emerge in Afghanistan, as well as some other parts of the world, as it attempts to, resurge from its, crushing at the hands of Iran and the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq. And, you know, who knows what this says about their strength, although I think Anne pointed this out very correctly. You know, they got through a number of checkpoints, they did a number of things, and you just hope that this doesn't portend a broader wave of attempts by ISIS. I think that's exactly what they would like, is the maximum number of casualties and chaos, and perhaps to even try to provoke the United States to come back into Afghanistan to, you know, increase the contradictions here in the United States. So all important things to watch for. Obviously, a very tragic situation. At least 60 Afghans killed, scores of Afghans. The New York Times is reporting 12 U.S. Marines, 1 Navy corpsman, but terrible situation.
And I really want people to recognize that, you know, that's 60, that's a lot of people killed. You can imagine how many must have been injured in that attack who need hospital in. And keep in mind, the U.S. just froze the treasury assets of Afghanistan. And when you do that to a country, it impacts its ability to import basic necessities, including medical equipment and medicines. And there's already been a call I've seen about shortages in hospitals in Afghanistan. Financial penalties like the U.S. is imposing will make the situation even worse. And, you know, unfortunately, this is certainly going to be, you know, going to happen again. There's going to likely be attacks like this again in Afghanistan, and people are going to need medical treatment. And, you know, it's going to be a painful time for the country. And just imagine how much more painful it will be if the country is being financially suffocated.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, the Financial Times did a roundtable discussion. I believe it was yesterday, might have been the day before yesterday. Wasn't a roundtable discussion. It was an interview with David Petraeus, who, you know, of course, imperial warlord, so he's following these issues. He estimated that Afghanistan only had about 9 days worth of money the government left to really be able to do anything. And I think, again, this was yesterday, maybe the day before that. So, you know, essentially a week now at this point. And now you have this among many other casualties, you know, major crises, I should say. Yeah, I think you're very right, Rania. And I think it's obviously a coercive measure, you know, designed to create the maximum level of pain to, again, try to let the United States determine what happens in Afghanistan. And I think whatever we think about the Taliban, whatever we think about any of these people, that's the root of all these problems, is this U.S. imperial mentality that they can control everything and tell everyone what to do and dictate it with force. And we end up in these just atrocious situations. But
right, you're worried about women's rights? Well, okay, but, you know, the lives of women are going to deteriorate pretty dramatically if you crash Afghanistan's economy. I'm watching that happen. I'm watching an economy crash in Lebanon, and it's very bad for women. It's very bad for everyone. It certainly doesn't help anyone gain access to basic rights or basic needs. So that's certainly something to keep in mind and to, try to pressure. It's amazing. I haven't seen anybody push back on that in government. It's just like the only other thing they know how to do if they don't get their way. And like you said, as a coercive measure. And so we'll see how far the U.S. lets that go. But I mean, just to go into a country and spend so long, you know, backing warlords and committing atrocities, to then just leave by like lighting a fire to the economy and just creating all this chaos and havoc. I mean, what else to expect America, I guess.
I know. Well, on that note, I think that brings us to the end of our show here. As always, Rania, it's such a pleasure to be able to do the show with you. You know, I would ask for those who do enjoy the work that we do here at Breakthrough News, you can go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news. Become a patron. Big shout out to all our patrons already. Certainly your patronage helps push us forward in a big way here at Breakthrough News. Appreciate all of our supporters. Your moral support also pushing us forward here on Breakthrough News. But we'll be back with you again next week, as we are every Thursday, 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time here in the United States on the Freedom Side.
Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.